What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Zero Lab. Today we're taking a look at Ceruledge EX in the Prismatic Evolutions format. Obviously, things are getting pretty shaken up in this new format with this new set because of one very special card, and that is Budew. Ceruledge EX has been an interesting card ever since it came out in Surging Sparks, but it hasn't really been that competitively viable, even though it can swing for a ton of damage pretty quickly, really early on in the game, and can have a pretty good time into decks like Regidrago V-Star. It hasn't really seen the light of day yet, but I do think that it's actually a lot better in this Prismatic Evolutions format. And there's a couple reasons for that we'll go over in this video, and we'll go over the deck list we're playing right now, as well as a couple of different inclusions you could put into the deck list. So, starting off with the Will-O-Wisp, Charcadet with Will-O-Wisp can one-shot opposing Budews. It is now definitely the best Charcadet to play. 3 of the Ceruledge. 1/1 Togekiss line in here. Togekiss has that Wonder Kiss ability that when your opponent's active Pokemon is knocked out, you flip a coin. If heads, you get to take an extra prize card. We'll get back to why that's in the list a little bit later here. Then we have one of the new Budew, obviously, with that that attack that is going to item lock your opponents for no energy. Then we have Squawkabilly EX, Fezandipiti EX, Radiant Greninja to round out the Pokemon lineup here. Then we have 4 Research, 3 Boss, 1 Iono, 1 Briar, 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Nest Ball, 3 Earthen Vessel, 2 Rare Candies, obviously, to get into that Togekiss, 2 Night Stretchers, a Brilliant Blender, a Heavy Ball, a Super Rod, a Pal Pad, 2 PokéStops, 10 Fire Energy, 4 Water Energy, 4 Jet Energy. I'm sure you have a couple of questions about that energy split. We'll go over it here. First, we're going to go back to the Togekiss. One of the things that Ceruledge can struggle against is one-prize decks. Gardevoir EX, for example, not really fully a one-prize deck, but it really can swing for big damage with those one-prize attackers like Drifloon. Ceruledge is going to have a tough time into Gardevoir EX, so finding ways to cheat extra prizes with Togekiss and Briar in combination is going to be your best way to defeat Gardevoir EX. There's other ways to do that. Obviously, they might put a Bravery Charm on a Drifloon to one-shot your Ceruledge, and then you could play like a Lost Vacuum in here. Vacuum and then take a knockout on something else with Ceruledge to take a multi-prize turn, but the Togekiss really is, I think, the best way to cheat prizes against those one-prize decks like Gardevoir, like Ancient Box, for example. The Budew in here, obviously, we just want to have time to set up against other decks that might have been difficult for Ceruledge in the past, like Charizard EX. Budew gives us an extra couple of turns where by the time we're no longer item locking our opponent, we are hitting for 330 damage with all of our energies basically in the discard pile. Budew also slows down the game enough where there's often games where you can just start powering up Radiant Greninja. So a lot of Ceruledge decks in the past have played Palkia V-Star. Then you can use that V-Star ability to power up the Radiant Greninja and use that Moonlight Shuriken attack. We don't really have that in here, but we do have a couple of ways to still use that Moonlight Shuriken attack, which is why I think the water energies are still valuable to have in the list. It doesn't come up often, but it's worth having those 4 water energies in the list because it really doesn't ruin our consistency of having those fire energies when we need them. So Budew, we're item locking, let's say against Charizard, against a Gardevoir. Let's say they're having a tough time. Nest Balls, and we just start manually attaching to Radiant Greninja, we can get that Moonlight Shuriken attack off after we've been using Budew to item lock them for a couple of turns. The other thing is if our opponent has a slow start, or if we just have nothing better to do turn 1, we can motivate with Squawkabilly and get those energies on Greninja as well. Those are a couple of ways to get the Radiant Greninja powered up, so I think it is still worth playing those water energies in the deck list. Now, a couple other things. We have 3 Boss. I think having 3 Boss in the deck is really important. Have the 2 Rare Candies to get into the Togekiss. I think you need to play 2 Rare Candy to just like get into it more often. I think if we just played a 1 Togepi, 1 Togekiss, and 1 Rare Candy, we just wouldn't be finding it often enough. Plus, we're discarding our hand a lot with Research, so we might end up discarding that candy before we can get into the Togekiss. So I do think playing 2 Rare Candy is good. The Brilliant Blender, I still think this is the best ace spec for Ceruledge. When you find it early, you're just thinning your deck of energy, and now you're drawing into much better cards. I just think this is the best way to get the deck moving. So Heavy Ball makes sense in here. Super Rod and Pal Pad. Super Rod can refill the deck of our Pokemon. We can get a couple extra Pokemon back that we might have discarded off of PokéStop. Maybe originally I was playing 3 Night Stretcher, and I just felt like 2 Night Stretcher and a Super Rod was a little bit better. And then the Pal Pad, obviously, we're going to mill away some of our supporters. We want to have extra boss. We want to have Iono, and we want to make sure we have Briar for late game. So having the Pal Pad in the deck also makes sense. 18 energy, I think, is the ideal energy count for Ceruledge. The jet energies help us against things like stall and whatnot. I think there's just no reason not to play the jet energies. Then we already talked about why we have the water energy. This is very strong, very powerful. There's obviously ways you could change up the deck, which we'll go over here in a little bit. But talking about some of the most common matchups, we're going to start with Regidrago V-Star because that is the best deck in the format before Prismatic Evolutions. And it may be on its way out a little bit because of the item lock of Budew, but I think it's not fully gone. And I think Regidrago V-Star is a very, very, very favored matchup for this deck. They're going to have a tough time. The only way they have to one-shot the Ceruledges is with Giratina V-Star. We Budew them early, and we take the first 2 prizes, and we're pretty much winning that matchup every time. If they go first, obviously, we now have Budew to item lock them turn 2. If they go second, we're also fine with that, and that's one of the things I like about the Ceruledge deck is you're kind of fine going first or second. Personally, I'm choosing second right now because I want to play a supporter, I want to squawk, and I want to, I want to Budew my opponent, item lock them turn 1. So I do opt to go second, but this deck really doesn't hate to go first either. So that's a really nice thing to play. Really nice way this deck plays is you don't care if you go first or second. You choose second, but you're okay going first. So we talked about Regidrago. Gardevoir, again, I said that can be a tough matchup. I think Gardevoir gets a lot better in the Prismatic Evolutions format, so I think you need to find ways to make that matchup better, and I think the Togekiss is sort of the way to get there. Togekiss in combination with Briar can help you cheat a couple extra prizes during that matchup. Yeah, so I think that's good. The Charizard matchup, I think, is pretty good because build themselves, but I think the Togekiss helps in that matchup a lot, right? Because you're initially probably going to take a 1 prize knockout, and then that Togekiss can help you cheat an extra prize later in the game on a 2 prizer, so maybe take 3. And then we also have the Briar as well. If we get really, really behind for some reason in that matchup, there's like a chance of taking a 4 prize turn with Briar and then flipping heads on Togekiss. So the Briar Togekiss combination can also help this deck come from way behind, 4-2, and just take a 4 prize turn. It's not common, obviously. It can be difficult to do. You have to flip heads on the Togekiss, but these are just options in the deck to help a deck that is really fast and aggressive but just needs a little bit more help to cheat extra prizes against certain matchups. I think those cards are really, really good. So the Charizard matchup, I think, is good, and it really depends on how Charizard decks build themselves coming into this format because of Budew. If they play things like Grand Tree, maybe that could get a little bit more difficult because they're not as worried about the item lock. And if Grand Tree becomes really prevalent, I would say probably just throw a Togetic in the deck as well to utilize your opponent's Grand Tree. That would be an option if Grand Tree becomes like a really big stadium in the format. I don't really think Grand Tree will become a big stadium in the format because you really don't love giving your opponent Grand Tree in a world where like Dusknors exist. You just give them a free Dusknor with your own Grand Tree, and that seems pretty bad. So I don't think Grand Tree is going to become a huge part of the format. But if it did, we could throw a Togetic in here as well to take advantage. Good Gardevoir matchup, tough, but we have ways to play it with the Togekiss and the Briar. Arcaladon should be a very good matchup for us. They don't have a great way to one-shot the Ceruledges. We just have to watch out for crazy turns where they can, Dialga, V-Star, Dusknor, if they're playing Dusknor in their deck. Like, the Arcaladon with Dusknor is probably a tougher matchup than just, like, the straight Arcaladon decks. So it remains to be seen how Arcaladon is built, but then if they are playing the Dusknor, you do have to watch out for sort of the Dialga V-Star turns, where they might end up taking like a 4 or 5 prize turn with Dusknor, then Dialga. Arcaladon should be a good matchup. Dragapult Dusknor is also a very good matchup for this deck. I find it to be totally fine. I haven't really lost to one yet. I've played a lot of them on the ladder. That has been a fine matchup. Lugia can be a little bit tougher, but the item lock really slows them down, and by the time they're really getting going, our Ceruledge is kind of knocking out their two prizers. The problem is the Regigigas can swing that matchup a lot, and that's again where the Togekiss and the Briar come back in, where we're kind of trying to cheat extra prize cards out of that matchup. Any matchup where they're using one prizers to one shot our big two prizers, our Ceruledges, the Togekiss and the Briar are going to help out in those matchups a lot. So Lugia can be tough if they get going quickly, but the item lock does slow them down quite a bit. So I think they can obviously be reading the wind, but if they're reading the wind, then their Lugia is in danger of getting knocked out by our Ceruledge, things like that, and they don't have the items to be able to go. But it is certainly one of those other matchups I think you have to watch out for because they have one prizers that can one-shot our Ceruledges. So Lugia, I think, is a fine matchup. Guardy, a little bit tougher, but we can get there. Charizard, a good matchup. Regidrago V-Star, a good matchup. Arcaludon, a good matchup. Dragapult, a good matchup. So I think this deck is in a pretty good spot in the meta. One thing is, how is Snorlax going to adapt to this new format? Because right now Snorlax is probably a pretty tough matchup. We do have the Jet Energies, and we can, if you need a way through Mimikyu, we don't really have that in this version of the deck, but Togekiss, you can kind of manually power that up and hit for 140 and then keep using Jet Energies. That is certainly a way, and the Togekiss helps us cheat extra prizes against Snorlax, so I think that's like ultimately probably going to be okay, but you really want to be careful with your Pokéstops and your researches that you're not discarding your Jet Energies, because those are kind of how we're going to get there against Snorlax. So a couple of options for other inclusions. Second, Budew. Budew is, I mean, you want to choose second and you want to go into Budew most of the time turn 1. So a second Budew in the deck could increase the odds turn 1. Palkia V-Star obviously has been a way that people are playing it. You probably want to mix up the fire and water energy counts a little bit. If we threw Palkia V-Star back in, you'd probably have to cut the Togekiss line to fit Palkia back in. But if you don't think the Togekiss is very good, I think you just slot the Palkia V-Star line back in. Lets you more consistently Moonlight Shuriken, and Palkia itself is a fine attacker as well. Canceling Clone is another option, gets you through Mimikyus, gets you through any wall sort of scenarios, and can help against Manaphy's if you want to play like the Palkia with the Radiant Greninja. And then Fan Rotom, I think, is an interesting one-prize attacker as well. Since we're playing 4 Jet Energies, we talked about how we can get through Mimikyu with Togekiss, but Fan Rotom can also help that because it just does 70, which is the perfect number to knock out a Mimikyu, and to knock out like opposing Budews and those sorts of things as well. We already have the Charcadet to knock out opposing Budews, I guess, but Fan Rotom could be a cool inclusion in here. There's going to be a Stadium in play, an Assault Landing with a Jet Energy to do 70 against our opponent. Seems pretty good. So I do think that this deck list is very, very good into this format. And really, it's a lot of fun as well. I'm having a lot of fun playing this deck, and I hope you're willing to give it a shot and see how you can do with it for yourself. But I do think this is very strong, and I'm excited to see how Ceruledge can do in this Prismatic Evolutions format. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.